On April 15, 2006, that date remains etched in the memory of every resident of town. It was the day when Ethan Reynolds and Olivia Carter vanished without a trace during a high school field trip to Mount Rainier, ages 17 and 16, young sweethearts who had been together for 2 years. That morning they left with their senior class, excited for the educational outing. They never came back. 3 years later in May, just as the case had been closed and their families had lost all hope, a chance discovery would change everything. While sorting through photos of the trip for a commemorative album, history teacher Catherine Miller noticed something strange. In several pictures, a middle-aged man appeared in the background, always near the young couple, watching them with unusual intensity. A man no one had noticed that day, a man who had no reason to be there. This discovery would open the door to one of the darkest cases in Washington's recent history, because behind what had seemed like a simple accident or a runaway love story hid a far more terrifying reality. How had he gone unnoticed? Who was this mysterious man? And above all, what did he really know about Ethan and Olivia's disappearance? Before we continue with this disturbing story, if you enjoy real mysterious cases like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single case. Now let's discover how it all began. To truly understand the scope of this tragedy, we first need to know the world in which Ethan and Olivia lived. Tacoma, Washington, a port city of 200,000 residents, prided itself on its history and its proximity to the Puget Sound. In 2006, the city enjoyed a period of relative prosperity with unemployment below the national average and a lively, youthful population. Lincoln High School, a century-old institution located on South 37th Street, welcomed around 1,200 students from mainly middle-class and professional families. Known for its academic excellence and strong graduation rates, the school frequently organized trips to historical sites across the state. Mount Rainier, located about 120 miles away, was a favorite destination for history and English classes alike. Ethan Reynolds was born on March 12, 1989, to a successful family of business owners. His father, Philip Reynolds, managed a regional chain of sporting goods stores, while his mother, Sylvia, was a pharmacist. Ethan was an average student, but he made up for his academic struggles with natural charisma and athletic talent. Captain of the school's rugby team, he stood 6 feet tall, with light brown hair and his mother's striking green eyes. His teachers described him as generous, sometimes impulsive, but fiercely loyal to his friends. Olivia Carter, born August 28, 1989, came from a more modest but equally respected background. Her mother, Martha, taught math at a local middle school, while her father, Bernard, worked as a freight inspector for the railroad. Olivia was the definition of a model student, top of her class since middle school and elected student representative. She excelled in literature and languages. Petite, with long brown hair usually tied back in a ponytail, she balanced her natural shyness with a fierce determination and maturity beyond her years. Their love story began in September 2004, at the start of junior year. Ethan, drawn to Olivia's intelligence, spent months convincing her to date him. At first, she resisted the idea of going out with the popular athlete, but eventually she gave in to his sincerity and kindness. Their complementary personalities made them a strong couple. He brought joy and lightheartedness, while she offered steadiness and ambition. Their families, after initial concern about their age, had come to accept the relationship. Their senior class had 32 students, guided by an experienced teaching staff. Catherine Miller, 53, had taught history at Lincoln High for 25 years. A graduate of Columbia University, she was respected for her academic rigor and her dedication to organizing educational trips. Divorced mother of 2 grown children, she carried a genuine passion for passing on historical knowledge. The principal, Henry Blanchard, 58, had run the school for a decade. With a background in public education administration, he was a discreet yet effective leader, well regarded by the school district and local authorities. The trip to Mount Rainier was part of the senior curriculum in medieval history. Planned months in advance, it was meant to give students first-hand exposure to Gothic architecture and medieval urban planning. The program included a guided tour of the visitor center, a lecture on the history of pilgrimages, and a walk along the overlooks to observe geological formations. That morning, April 15, 2006, the sky over Washington was a uniform gray, typical of spring in the region. The temperature hovered around 54 degrees, with a westerly breeze carrying the sharp scent of wet pine. At precisely that time, the school charter bus pulled up in front of Lincoln High. Mrs. Miller began roll call for the 32 students signed up for the trip. Olivia, always punctual, had arrived 10 minutes early, her backpack carefully packed the night before. She wore her favorite jeans, a beige wool sweater, and hiking sneakers. Ethan showed up a few minutes later, slightly out of breath from running from the bus stop. He had thrown on a black leather jacket over a white t-shirt, his usual uniform that gave him the laid-back look his classmates envied. The trip to Mount Rainier was expected to take about 2 hours, with a planned stop in Eatonville. Mrs. Miller handed out a worksheet the students were required to fill out during the visit. Naturally, Ethan and Olivia sat together midway down the bus. Classmates later recalled that they seemed relaxed and happy, joking with friends and joining in conversations. During the ride, Olivia reviewed her notes on medieval architecture, while Ethan listened to his MP3 player, occasionally sharing an earbud with her. Around 9:30 a.m., during the rest stop in Eatonville, they got off together to buy drinks at a convenience store. The manager, questioned later by investigators, vaguely remembered a young couple, matching their description but couldn't provide precise details. The group reached Mount Rainier around 10:45 a.m. The site was already crowded despite the early hour and the season. Mrs. Miller gathered her students in the bus parking lot and reminded them of the safety rules. Stay with the group during the tour. Don't wander off from the guide, and meet back at exactly 4 p.m. at the bus for departure. The guided tour began at 11:20 sharp. Led by James Harvey, a professional tour guide who had been working at the park for 15 years. A 42-year-old with a degree in art history, he was known for his engaging tours, blending anecdotes with technical explanations. The group made their way up the main trail lined with souvenir shops and small cafes. Olivia took notes diligently, asking sharp questions that showed her careful preparation. Ethan, less passionate about medieval history, nevertheless paid attention, especially when the guide spoke about construction techniques and architectural feats. By 12:30 p.m., after visiting the visitor center's exhibits and the Old Stone Lodge, the group took their lunch break in a reserved hall at a local restaurant. Mrs. Miller had arranged for a private space where students could eat the lunches they'd packed. The atmosphere was lighthearted, the students chatting about the morning's tour. It was at that moment that the accounts began to diverge. Several classmates later claimed to have seen Ethan and Olivia finish their meal around 1 p.m., but no one could say for sure if they rejoined the group afterward. Mrs. Miller, preoccupied with sorting out minor logistical issues with the restaurant, didn't take attendance after lunch, relying instead on a quick head count. The afternoon itinerary included the Cloister Trail, the Old Ranger Dining Hall, and the western overlook with its sweeping views of the valley. Guide James Harvey recalled noticing a few students missing around 2 p.m., but wasn't overly concerned. He knew teenagers sometimes lingered behind or slipped away briefly. It wasn't until 4 p.m., at the scheduled meeting point by the bus, that Ethan and Olivia's absence was officially noted. Mrs. Miller did a full roll call and confirmed 2 students were missing. She immediately sent classmates to search nearby areas, thinking the couple had simply lost track of time while browsing shops. 15 minutes passed with no result. The history teacher then made the decision to delay departure and organize a more systematic search. She split the group into 3 search teams. One team searched the main trail and the souvenir shops. A second checked the stone walls and gardens around the visitor center. A third questioned staff working at the tourist site. By 5 p.m., with no progress, Mrs. Miller contacted the Pierce County Sheriff's Department in Eatonville, the closest jurisdiction with a field office. Sergeant Alan Russell personally arrived with 2 deputies. The first investigation focused on park security and shopkeepers along the main trail. Witness accounts were inconsistent and unreliable. A souvenir vendor thought he had seen a young couple around 3 p.m., but couldn't confirm. A waitress at the Paradise Lodge cafeteria mentioned a boy and girl matching the description near the South Lookout around 3:30 p.m., but that didn't match the official tour schedule. By 6:30 p.m., Sergeant Russell made the decision to allow the charter bus to return with the 30 remaining students, while Mrs. Miller stayed behind to continue the search. Ethan and Olivia's parents were contacted immediately and rushed to Mount Rainier, arriving around 8 p.m. Night fell over the mountain with no new information. Reinforced search efforts continued. Sheriff's K-9 units, divers to comb areas exposed at low water, and Civil Air Patrol helicopters at first light. The extreme mountain terrain and weather, much like the dangerous tides of the Pacific Northwest, quickly became the investigators' main concern. The official investigation was opened April 16th under the direction of Detective Jack Monroe, a 45-year-old veteran with the Tacoma Police Department's Major Crimes Unit. Married with children, he had already handled several teenage disappearance cases in his career. His methodical approach and natural empathy made him a trusted figure for grieving families. The first 48 hours were critical. The theory of a mountain accident was quickly ruled out thanks to the intense search. The rugged terrain, despite its dangers, could not have swallowed two teenagers without leaving any trace in such a well-traveled area. No witnesses reported seeing them stray off marked paths. Neighborhood-style canvassing revealed troubling details. Despite appearances, Ethan and Olivia's relationship had been strained in recent weeks. Close friends confirmed growing tension tied to future plans. Olivia wanted to pursue a literature program out of state, while Ethan planned to study business locally. Their cell phones found in their backpacks left on the bus provided no clue. The last calls and texts showed nothing unusual. Routine chats with friends. A love message exchanged that same morning. Olivia had even texted her mother at 11:54 a.m. to say the visit was fascinating. The families coped very differently. Philip and Sylvia Reynolds, used to solving problems with action and resources, quickly hired a private investigator and offered a $50,000 reward for any information leading to their son. They organized volunteer searches, printed thousands of flyers, and contacted national media. Bernard and Martha Carter, more reserved and with fewer means, trusted the authorities but quietly ran their own search. Martha took unpaid leave to devote herself fully, sifting through every testimony and keeping a personal file parallel to the official case. Weeks passed with no results. The runaway theory was seriously considered but fell apart under closer scrutiny. Neither Ethan nor Olivia had taken personal belongings. Their bank accounts were untouched. Neither had expressed a desire to leave home. Their personalities, as described by loved ones, didn't fit the profile of runaways. Summer 2006 slipped by in cycles of hope and despair. Every reported sighting of a couple matching their description sparked frantic mobilization, but each proved false. First local, then national media picked up the story. The Seattle Times published detailed articles while NBC's Dateline aired a segment on missing families. The fall semester of 2006 was especially painful for their classmates. Lincoln High organized a support ceremony for both families, but the atmosphere remained heavy with questions. Their empty desks in senior year became a daily reminder of the tragedy. Several classmates developed anxiety disorders requiring counseling provided by the school. Detective Monroe pressed on, methodically investigating every lead. He re-interviewed all excursion participants, park employees present that day, shopkeepers, and even other tourists identified through entrance records. A painstaking effort that revealed no suspicious elements. The kidnapping theory was also examined. Investigators checked the backgrounds of all employees, bus drivers, and even tourists logged at the site. No links to criminal networks were found. The absence of a ransom demand deepened the mystery. By spring 2007, a year after the disappearance, the investigation stalled. Despite enormous efforts from law enforcement and families, no serious lead emerged. Under pressure from superiors, and burdened with other urgent cases, Detective Monroe had to scale back resources on the file. It was during this period that Mark Fontaine appeared in the family's lives. At 52, a former Army officer turned private security consultant, he approached the Reynoldses in May 2007 claiming to have information. Divorced, childless, he said he was deeply moved by the couple's story and wanted to help. With his imposing 6'1" frame, graying cropped hair, and piercing eyes, he looked the part. His professional experience and connections in law enforcement made him sound credible. He offered his services voluntarily, insisting his only goal was justice. His approach differed from official investigators. Fontaine emphasized behavioral analysis and cross-checking overlooked details. He spent weeks reconstructing April 15th minute by minute, re-interviewing witnesses with relentless persistence. His methods, sometimes skirting legal limits, irritated Detective Monroe but reassured the desperate. families. The year 2008 brought what psychologists call ambiguous loss, the painful process of learning to live with permanent uncertainty. With no body, no explanation, no closure, the Reynolds and Carter families had to reorganize their lives around that void. Philip Reynolds became obsessed with new investigative technologies, funding advanced equipment for volunteer search groups in hopes that new tools could crack the mystery. Sylvia sank into deep depression, requiring repeated hospitalizations. Bernard Carter slowly returned to his railroad job, though colleagues noticed his constant distraction and frequent absences. Martha maintained her leave of absence, turning the family home into a command center for the search. She kept in close touch with other families of missing children, building an informal yet effective support network. Fontaine became ever-present. He joined meetings with investigators, helped organize search parties, and advised on keeping media attention alive. His constant availability and apparent emotional investment reassured the families, who began to see him as the unwavering ally they needed. On May 15, 2009, the case took a decisive turn. Catherine Miller, still deeply shaken by the loss of her students, had decided to create a commemorative photo album for the 3rd anniversary of the tragedy. Her goal was to collect all pictures taken during the trip and build a proper memorial for Ethan and Olivia. The project meant everything to her. She still carried the weight of responsibility. 3 years of recurring nightmares and guilt had driven her to therapy, where her psychologist suggested this as a way to channel pain into a constructive tribute. She contacted all the participants to gather their personal photos. At her dining room table, she laid out everything she had collected: snapshots taken by students with their digital cameras, her own shots with a film camera, and even images from tourists she had reached out to. In all, more than 100 photographs documented that tragic day from every angle. Around 2 p.m., as she arranged the shots chronologically by location, her eye caught a detail she had never noticed before. In a photo taken by Amelia Moore, a student in the class, around 1:15 p.m. near the main gate, a middle-aged man appeared in the background. He seemed to be watching something just out of frame with intense focus. Intrigued, Catherine Miller examined other photos from the same period. On a second image taken 15 minutes later by another student along the main trail, the same man was visible, still in the background but apparently fixed on a precise point. The teacher pulled out a magnifier to study the details: average height, dark jacket, baseball cap, discreet but alert posture. A third photo, this time taken by Mrs. Miller herself around 1:45 p.m. in front of the Abbey entrance overlook, revealed the same figure. This angle allowed a clearer view of his face. It was undeniably the same individual, and his recurring presence shadowing the school group could not be a coincidence. Mrs. Miller felt a chill as she grasped the implications of this discovery. She methodically reviewed all the other photos, noting each appearance of the mysterious man. In total, he was visible in 7 different shots, always close to the students, always in a watchful stance. In one, he even seemed to be following Ethan and Olivia as they drifted slightly from the main group. The teacher immediately called Detective Jack Monroe to share what she had found. The investigator, who had kept the file on a low simmer without ever abandoning it, arrived at Mrs. Miller's home within the hour. Examining the photographs confirmed his suspicions. The man clearly didn't belong to the school group, and his repeated presence was suspicious. Monroe had all the images scanned in high definition and sent them to the forensics unit at Tacoma Police Department for in-depth analysis. Imaging techniques had advanced significantly since 2006, allowing substantial enhancement and extraction of details invisible to the naked eye. The results were ready the very next day. The man's face could be reconstructed by compiling the different angles. The composite sketch was immediately distributed across law enforcement networks nationwide, including the FBI's VICAP system and BOLO alerts. The reaction was immediate. By mid-May, 3 matching tips reached investigators. The first came from the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, where a deputy formally recognized Mark Fontaine, the man who had been helping the families for 2 years. The second came from Tacoma Police, where Fontaine had minor citations on record. The third, most troubling, came from Washington State Social Services, which had handled a report concerning him in 2005. Detective Monroe felt a mix of satisfaction and bitterness as he learned the man's identity. Satisfaction, because after 3 years of drifting, the case finally had a concrete direction. Bitterness, because he realized the suspect had fooled everyone from the start. Manipulating grieving families with chilling cynicism, Mark Fontaine was taken into custody on May 19, 2009. At 6 a.m., the arrest took place at his apartment, a small rental on South 11th Street in Tacoma. The search uncovered sophisticated computer equipment, dozens of files on missing teenagers across the United States, and most of all, a cache of photos taken at Mount Rainier on April 15, 2006. Among these personal shots, some showed Ethan and Olivia in disturbing detail. Fontaine had clearly followed the couple all day, documenting their every move with a predator's obsession. One particularly harrowing telephoto image showed the two teenagers sharing a tender kiss near the overlook. Unaware they were being watched and hunted, interrogation began on May 20th at 9 a.m. in the major crimes offices. Detective Monroe, assisted by his colleague Captain Sophia Duran, a specialist in crimes involving minors, personally conducted the crucial interview. Across the table, Fontaine remained unnervingly calm, as if he had anticipated this moment for a long time. Confronted with the incriminating photographs, the 52-year-old did not deny being at Mount Rainier on April 15, 2006. His defense strategy was carefully prepared. He claimed he had gone to the park that day purely by coincidence, in connection with a surveillance assignment for an insurance company. According to him, he was discreetly observing a claimant suspected of faking disability. Parts of that story were verifiable. Fontaine did freelance work for several insurance carriers and private investigative agencies. His appointment book did list an assignment in Enumclaw on April 15th, a town about 14 miles from the park entrance. However, no documentation justified his specific presence inside the park that day. Detective Monroe dug into that lead methodically. He contacted the insurer, which confirmed Fontaine had indeed been assigned a case that week. But the investigation involved a resident of Enumclaw who, according to family and records, had never gone to Mount Rainier. The timing was a little too perfect. Fontaine had clearly used a legitimate assignment as an alibi to explain his presence in the area. More troubling still, analysis of Fontaine's personal photos revealed an intimate knowledge of the school group's movements. Several shots were taken even before the charter bus arrived, showing he had been watching the parking lot since early morning. Other images mapped the guided tour's exact route, as if he knew the schedule in advance. This discovery steered the investigation in a new direction. How had Fontaine learned the excursion details? Field trip information wasn't public. It required privileged access to school planning. Monroe and his team began probing possible connections between Fontaine and the local education system. The investigation confirmed Fontaine did have ties in that world. His ex-wife, Marie-Claire Dubois, worked as an administrative assistant at the Tacoma School District offices and had been there for 15 years. Although they had divorced in 2004, they maintained cordial relations and met regularly to handle paperwork tied to their separation. Marie-Claire was invited in on May 22nd for a voluntary interview. A reserved woman in her 40s, she seemed genuinely shocked to learn of the suspicions against her ex-husband. She confirmed they met about once a month at a cafe near the district office, but firmly denied ever discussing field trips with him. However, the administrative review showed Marie-Claire's role granted access to all schools' field trip authorizations across the district. These documents, processed for official approval, contained every detail: date, schedules, route, head count, names of chaperones. Extremely sensitive information that, in the wrong hands, allowed precise targeting of student groups. Faced with this reality during a second interview, Marie-Claire broke down. She admitted that during some of their meetings, Mark occasionally used her laptop, claiming he needed to check personal email. She had never suspected he might be accessing her work files. The guilt of this upright woman was heartbreaking. She realized she had unwittingly contributed to a tragedy. A forensic exam of Marie-Claire's computer confirmed investigators' suspicions. System logs showed suspicious connections from her home to the district server at times when she wasn't present. Fontaine had installed spyware to capture her credentials and passwords. Through them, he regularly accessed the district's field trip databases, building a veritable catalog of potential targets. This revelation dramatically widened the case. How many other excursions had Fontaine surveilled? Were there other victims? Detective Monroe formed a specialized task force to systematically analyze every unauthorized access to district data and cross-reference it with unsolved teenage disappearances in the region. The results were terrifying. Between January 2005 and April 2006, Fontaine had consulted records for 43 school trips across Pierce, King, and Thurston counties. Among these outings, 7 had troubling incidents. 3 attempted runaways where teens were quickly found but traumatized. 2 temporary disappearances with the teens reappearing days later without coherent explanations. And of course, the case of Ethan and Olivia. The investigation took on a national scope when police departments in Seattle, Everett, and Tacoma's suburbs flagged similar cases involving disappearances during school trips. The modus operandi was identical. Prior surveillance of groups, discreet following during the excursion, then the unexplained disappearance of 1 or more teenagers. In some instances, victims were found but refused to discuss their ordeal, clearly terrified. Emily Legrand, 16, had vanished during a school trip to a historic fort in March 2006, 1 month before Ethan and Olivia. Found 3 days later in a forested area outside Tacoma, she showed signs of mistreatment and severe psychological shock. Her testimony, extracted with difficulty by psychologists, spoke of a kind man who offered help, then locked her in a basement. These new elements strengthened the case against Fontaine. The Pierce County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, coordinating with the Washington State Attorney General's Office, opened a formal case for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment of minors, with aggravating circumstances suggesting an organized group. The lone predator theory gave way to the possibility of a structured criminal network. Fontaine, it seemed, had not acted alone. The interrogation hardened. Faced with the mounting evidence and testimony from other victims, Mark Fontaine's defense began to collapse. Still, he continued to deny direct involvement in the disappearances, hiding behind the claim that he was merely an observer who happened to be there by chance. His attorneys, Mr. Bernard and Russell, argued the lack of physical proof directly linking him to the abductions. That's when the investigation uncovered a crucial element. A deep forensic dive into Fontaine's computer revealed deleted files. Among them, investigators discovered encrypted correspondence with several unidentified contacts. Once decoded by cybercrime experts, the messages exposed the existence of an underground black market for teenagers. The emails showed that Fontaine was a recruiter for a criminal organization specializing in human trafficking. His role was to identify and monitor potential targets, primarily during school trips when adolescents were temporarily vulnerable. The information he collected was then passed on to other members of the network, who carried out the actual kidnappings. This discovery explained why Fontaine had inserted himself into the Reynolds and Carter families' lives after the disappearance. By posing as a volunteer helper, he could track the progress of the official investigation and adjust his organization's strategy accordingly. His constant presence at the family's side also allowed him to deflect suspicion and maintain the image of a man devoted to their cause. Authorities realized with horror that for 2 years, Fontaine had had access to all sensitive information about the case. Every lead the police pursued, every witness interviewed, every discovery made, he relayed instantly to his accomplices. This contamination explained why every search had failed. The criminals were always one step ahead. Detective Monroe had to completely overhaul his approach. He formed a new investigative team, fully isolated from prior efforts, and drastically restricted access to information. At the same time, discreet surveillance was set up around Fontaine's contacts, identified through the decrypted messages. This new phase of the investigation revealed the staggering scope of the criminal network. Working with the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, and law enforcement partners in multiple countries, investigators learned that the organization operated out of the U.S. and funneled victims to Eastern Europe, primarily Bulgaria and Romania. The kidnapped teens were transported through clandestine routes to feed various forms of exploitation. Under crushing evidence, Fontaine finally cracked during his 10th interrogation. On May 28th, after days of extended custody authorized by the courts, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His lawyers had made him understand that he faced life in prison without parole for his role in the network. His revelations were chilling. He confirmed the abduction of Ethan and Olivia on April 15, 2006, but claimed he was only the spotter. The actual operation, he said, was carried out by two men he knew only by their nicknames, the doctor and the driver. His role had been limited to shadowing the couple, pinpointing the right moment and guiding his accomplices toward the targets. According to his account, the abduction happened around 2:30 p.m., during a free break between two parts of the guided tour. Ethan and Olivia had slipped away toward the visitor center gardens for privacy, far enough from the group to be vulnerable. Fontaine then sent a coded text to his accomplices, waiting in a discreet vehicle near the edge of the parking area. The approach was terrifyingly simple. The doctor, posing as an emergency physician, approached the couple, claiming that one of their classmates had collapsed and urgently needed their help. Concerned for their friends, Olivia immediately wanted to go. Protective, Ethan refused to let her leave with strangers alone. They were led to what appeared to be an ambulance parked off to the side. Once close enough, they were subdued and drugged by injection. The operation lasted only minutes and drew no attention. The ambulance left the park through back roads, avoiding the main highways covered by security cameras. Fontaine's testimony led to the formal identification of his accomplices. The doctor was in fact Dmitry Petrov, a Bulgarian physician stripped of his license for malpractice, age 45, wanted by Interpol for organ trafficking. The driver was Gheorghe Ionescu, a Romanian national specializing in human smuggling, with criminal records in several European countries. The international investigation moved quickly. U.S. Bulgarian and Romanian authorities coordinated their efforts to locate the two men and dismantle the entire network. Fontaine's revelations provided enough detail to pinpoint the organization's operational bases hidden in rural Bulgaria. On May 30, 2009, a simultaneous operation was carried out in 3 countries. In the United States, 12 people were arrested, mainly local accomplices handling scouting and logistics. In Bulgaria, special forces stormed a farm property near Plovdiv, where 19 victims were found in captivity, including 7 Americans. In Romania, authorities dismantled a clandestine lab producing the false documents needed for transfers. Among the rescued victims in Bulgaria, Ethan and Olivia were tragically not found. According to testimony from the freed captives, the young couple had indeed been held there for several months in 2006, but were transferred to an unknown location at the beginning of autumn. This revelation devastated the Reynolds and Carter families. Their hope of finding their children alive grew faint, but at least they finally knew what had happened. The accounts from survivors revealed horrific conditions of captivity: confinement in damp basements, inadequate food, constant psychological abuse, and forced preparation for exploitation. The interrogation of Dmitry Petrov, arrested during the Bulgarian raid, brought new information about Ethan and Olivia's fate. The fake doctor confirmed that the young American couple had been a particular problem for the organization. Unlike other isolated victims who were easily manipulated, their mutual solidarity and joint resistance disrupted the usual conditioning process. Ethan had been especially defiant, repeatedly trying to protect Olivia and even attempting to organize escape plans with the other captives. Olivia, despite her small stature, showed remarkable courage, refusing to submit to her jailer's demands and keeping the morale of the others alive with her forced optimism. Their resistance eventually frustrated the leaders of the network, who decided it was easier to eliminate the 2 American teenagers rather than waste time and energy trying to break them. According to Petrov, they were killed in September 2006, and their bodies hidden in an abandoned quarry near Pazardzhik, about 60 miles southeast of Sofia. This revelation, though devastating, finally brought a grim form of closure to the families. Detective Monroe immediately organized a mission in Bulgaria to locate and recover the remains of Ethan and Olivia. With the help of cadaver dogs and advanced detection equipment, the search lasted 3 weeks. On June 22, 2009, the bodies of the 2 teenagers were finally found in the quarry Petrov had described. Formal identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA testing. The remains, well preserved by the region's dry climate, allowed the families to at last arrange the funerals they had waited for over 3 years. The repatriation took place on June 28 under the strictest privacy, respecting the family's grief. Philip and Sylvia Reynolds, Bernard and Martha Carter came together for the first time in a long while, united in sorrow, but also in a measure of relief. They finally knew what had happened to their children and could begin the true process of mourning. The funerals were held on July 1st at St. James Cathedral in Seattle, attended by more than 1,000 people. The entire school community, classmates, teachers, investigators, and many strangers moved by the tragedy came to pay their last respects to Ethan and Olivia. Their coffins, covered in white flowers, were laid to rest side by side at Evergreen Washelli Cemetery, uniting in death the two young people whose love had bound them in life. The trial of Mark Fontaine and his accomplices opened in March 2010 before the King County Superior Court. The case, which had grown to European proportions, drew national and international media attention. The victims' families, supported by their lawyers and by a newly formed association, Justice for Our Children, demanded the harshest possible sentences. Fontaine, the principal defendant, was charged with kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment of minors as part of an organized group, complicity in murder, and participation in a criminal network. His lawyers tried to minimize his role, portraying him as a pawn manipulated by criminals more dangerous than himself. But the accumulated evidence and gravity of the crimes allowed no leniency. On April 28, 2010, after 3 days of deliberation, the court rendered its verdict. Mark Fontaine was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole eligibility for 22 years. Dmitry Petrov and Georg Ionescu, tried in absentia, received the same sentence. Other members of the network arrested were given terms ranging from 15 to 25 years. Marie-Claire Dubois, Fontaine's ex-wife who had unwittingly facilitated access to school district records, was cleared of charges. The investigation proved she had been a victim of her ex-husband's manipulation and had never knowingly contributed to the criminal activities. Nevertheless, she left the region to rebuild her life elsewhere, tormented by guilt despite her legal innocence. The case prompted a complete overhaul of security protocols in public education. A new system was introduced to protect field trip data, with strictly limited access and reinforced tracking. Parental consent forms were also revised to include specific clauses on safety and potential risks. The Reynolds and Carter families, after obtaining justice, dedicated their energy to prevention. They created the Ethan and Olivia Foundation to raise awareness among schools about the risks associated with educational trips and to fund safety training for teachers. Their efforts helped drive national reforms in how school excursions were supervised. Philip Reynolds gradually returned to his professional activities, redirecting part of his business toward child safety at events. Sylvia, after overcoming her depression with the help of specialized therapy, became a volunteer for an organization supporting families of victims. Bernard Carter kept his railroad job but became an active advocate for improving transportation safety during school trips. Martha Carter resumed teaching after 2 years of leave. Her tragic experience strengthened both her dedication and her vigilance, and she became a recognized figure in the Tacoma district for organizing safe field trips, training many colleagues on new procedures. Detective Jack Monroe received commendations from his superiors for solving such a complex case. Yet the investigation had deeply marked him. He realized organized crime had evolved into ever more sophisticated forms, exploiting vulnerabilities in society's most fundamental systems. That awareness drove him to specialize in fighting human trafficking networks. Mrs. Catherine Miller continued teaching at Lincoln High but could never again organize a school trip. Her discovery of the compromising photos had been crucial to solving the case, yet she still bore the weight of not having noticed anything the day of the tragedy. She devoted her final years in education to training younger teachers on the vigilance required during student outings. Lincoln High placed a commemorative plaque in its entrance hall, honoring the memory of Ethan Reynolds and Olivia Carter. Every April 15th, a solemn ceremony is held to remember them and to raise awareness among new generations of students about safety. Their names are also inscribed on the memorial wall in Evergreen Washelli, recognizing them as victims of organized crime. The case had repercussions as far as Bulgaria and Romania, where authorities significantly strengthened their fight against human trafficking networks. Properties once used by the organization were seized and transformed into shelters for trafficking survivors. A European compensation fund was even established to support the families of victims of these transnational crimes. Today, 15 years after their disappearance, Ethan Reynolds and Olivia Carter rest side by side in the quiet cemetery of Evergreen Washelli. Their grave, always adorned with flowers by family and former classmates, bears witness to a love that outlived tragedy. These two young souls, united in life by genuine affection, remain together in death, victims of a cruelty they could never have imagined. Their story, harsh but necessary to tell, reminds us that behind the statistics of organized crime lie human tragedies of immeasurable depth. It shows how the persistence of investigators, the courage of families, and sometimes the chance of a late discovery can allow justice to prevail, even after years of despair. This case also reveals how predators can slip into the most ordinary corners of our lives, exploiting trust and routine to commit their crimes. The story of Ethan and Olivia underscores the power of family bonds and young love in the face of adversity and the crucial importance of collective vigilance to protect our children. What did you think of this investigation? Had you noticed the disturbing clues before the final reveal? Share your reflections in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to discover more solved criminal cases. Your likes and shares help us continue this work of remembrance for the victims.